Many of us know the historical music known as Hamilton. And spoiler alert, at the end of the musical, there's a duel. And with every duel, there's a doctor. Now, do you know who that doctor was, or what his American Eden, as it so often is called, was? Most likely not. The doctor was known as David Hozak. He studied at Columbia University, Princeton, and a few others, along with studying in London and Scotland. He was a fine man when it came to botany. Now, he studied at Columbia University, and he founded the Elgin Botanical Garden. But originally, the Botanical Garden wasn't his idea. Instead, it was his predecessor, Samuel Mitchell, who originally came up with the idea. Now, Mitchell wanted a botanical garden to be funded by either New York State or Columbia University, which he taught at and was the head of botany. Now, this idea didn't go anywhere. He never built the garden, he never even found a funder for it. And then along came Dr. Hozak, who then took his place and became the head of botany at the university. He rallied for funding from the New York State Legislature, a few different universities, but he never got it. So, instead, he founded the garden on 20 acres of land in upstate New York and funded it out of his own pocket. This garden existed for about 10 years, and during that time, over 2,000 both native and non-native plants were studied and cultivated. During this time, you could have many walkthroughs through the 20 acres of wildlife, and it was truly a jewel of New York at that time point. Now, because running a botanical garden, especially one that is 20 acres, is very expensive, after a few years, Dr. Hozak could no longer continue to fund it. So, February 3rd of 1811, he sold it. He sold it to New York State, who then, about a decade later, gave it to Columbia University. By this time, it had gone to ruins. Dr. Hozak made a few trips to go and see the garden, but he realized that it was in disrepair. Vines had taken over all of the buildings. Many of the plants were even missing, and it was total chaos. And in around the 1850s, New York decided it was more valuable if the land was dissolved into multiple different properties. And in the 1920s and 30s, the Rockefeller Project began, meaning the Rockefeller Center now lays over what the majority of the garden once was. In 1985, the land was officially sold to the Rockefeller Group. Now, this garden existed for such a short time, about only a decade, but in that time, it was a huge part of New York, and it founded New York's new love of botanical gardens. You can see Torrey, who founded the Torrey Botanical Garden, John Torrey to be specific, a man who studied under David Hozak and often studied in the garden. And an early member of that society was Nathan Breton, who founded the New York Botanical Garden. As I previously mentioned a few times, the garden didn't last for very long. But America now has over 200 botanical gardens in it. Many of them were founded soon after the garden, died off, as most of the plants did. Now, because this garden no longer exists and much of it was destroyed in the 50 years following its demise, there isn't much to go and see. There isn't even much research about this garden, despite what it started in America, and its founder founded many other things, like the New York Culture of Art Center. Overall, this garden and this doctor started something wonderful, America's love of botanical gardens, and he also discovered many cures. He studied yellow fever because his wife and children died of yellow fever before he started the garden. It no longer exists, but it still holds a love that this country has.